Adolf Hitler story. Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany's Nazi Party, was one of the most powerful and notorious dictators of the 20th century. Hitler capitalized on economic woes, popular discontent, and political infighting to take absolute power in Germany, beginning in 1933. Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 led to the outbreak of World War II, and by 1941 Nazi forces had occupied much of Europe. Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism and obsessive pursuit of Aryan supremacy fueled the murder of some 6 million Jews, along with other victims of the Holocaust. After the tide of war turned against him, Hitler committed suicide in a Berlin bunker in April 1945. Early life. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town near the Austro-German frontier. After his father, Adolf, retired as a state customs official, young Adolf spent most of his childhood in Linz, the capital of Upper Austria. Not wanting to follow in his father's footsteps as a civil servant, he began struggling in secondary school and eventually dropped out. Alois died in 1903, and Adolf pursued his dream of being an artist, though he was rejected from Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts. After his mother, Clara, died in 1908, Hitler moved to Vienna, where he pieced together a living painting scenery and monuments and selling the images. Lonely, isolated, and a voracious reader, Hitler became interested in politics during his years in Vienna and developed many of the ideas that would shape Nazi ideology. Military career of Adolf Hitler. In 1913, Hitler moved to Munich, in the German state of Bavaria. When World War I broke out the following summer, he successfully petitioned the Bavarian king to be allowed to volunteer in a reserve infantry regiment. Deployed in October 1914 to Belgium, Hitler served throughout the Great War and won 2 decorations for bravery, including the rare Iron Cross First Class, which he wore to the end of his life. Hitler was wounded twice during the conflict. He was hit in the leg during the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and temporarily blinded by a British gas attack near Ypres in 1918. A month later, he was recuperating in a hospital at Pasewalk, northeast of Berlin, when news arrived of the armistice and Germany's defeat in World War I. Like many Germans, Hitler came to believe the country's devastating defeat could be attributed not to the Allies, but to insufficiently patriotic traitors at home, a myth that would undermine the post-war Weimar Republic and set the stage for Hitler's rise. After Hitler returned to Munich in late 1918, he joined the small German Workers' Party, which aimed to unite the interests of the working class with a strong German nationalism. His skilled oratory and charismatic energy helped propel him in the party's ranks, and in 1920 he left the army and took charge of its propaganda efforts. In one of Hitler's strokes of propaganda genius, the newly renamed National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, adopted a version of the ancient symbol of the Hakenkreuz, or hooked cross, as its emblem. Printed in a white circle on a red background, Hitler's swastika would take on terrifying symbolic power in the years to come. By the end of 1921, Hitler led the growing Nazi Party, capitalizing on widespread discontent with the Weimar Republic and the punishing terms of the Versailles Treaty. Many dissatisfied former army officers in Munich would join the Nazis, notably Ernst Röhm, who recruited the strong-arm squads known as the Sturmabteilung SA, which Hitler used to protect party meetings and attack opponents. Wir Hall Putsch. On the evening of November 8, 1923, members of the SA and others forced their way into a large beer hall where another right-wing leader was addressing the crowd. Wielding a revolver, Hitler proclaimed the beginning of a national revolution and led marchers to the center of Munich, where they got into a gun battle with police. Hitler fled quickly, but he and other rebel leaders were later arrested. Even though it failed spectacularly, the beer hall putsch established Hitler as a national figure and, in the eyes of many, a hero of right-wing nationalism. Tried for treason, Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but would serve only 9 months in the relative comfort of Landsberg Castle. During this period, he began to dictate the book that would become Mein Kampf, My Struggle, the first volume of which was published in 1925. In it, Hitler expanded on the nationalistic, anti-Semitic views he had begun to develop in Vienna in his early 20s and laid out plans for the Germany and the world he sought to create when he came to power. Hitler would finish the second volume of Mein Kampf after his release, while relaxing in the mountain village of Berchtesgaden. It sold modestly at first, but with Hitler's rise it became Germany's best-selling book after the Bible. By 1940, it had sold some 6 million copies there. Hitler's second book, the WWII book, was written in 1928 and contained his thoughts on foreign policy. It was not published in his lifetime due to the poor initial sales of Mein Kampf. The first English translations of the WWII book did not appear until 1962 and was published under the title Hitler's Secret Book. Aryan Race. Obsessed with race and the idea of ethnic purity, Hitler saw a natural order that placed the so-called Aryan race at the top. For him, the unity of the Volk, the German people, would find its truest incarnation not in democratic or parliamentary government, but in one supreme leader or Führer. Mein Kampf also addressed the need for Lebensraum, or living space. In order to fulfill its destiny, Germany should take over lands to the east that were now occupied by other nations, including Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Russia. The Schutzstaffel, SS. By the time Hitler left prison, economic recovery had restored some popular support for the Weimar Republic, and support for right-wing causes like Nazism appeared to be waning. Over the next few years, Hitler laid low and worked on reorganizing and reshaping the Nazi Party. He established the Hitler Youth to organize youngsters and created the Schutzstaffel, SS, as a more reliable alternative to the SA. Members of the SS wore black uniforms and swore a personal oath of loyalty to Hitler. After 1929, under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, the SS would develop from a group of some 200 men into a force that would dominate Germany and terrorize the rest of occupied Europe during World War II. Hitler spent much of his time at Berchtesgaden during these years. The worldwide Great Depression that began in 1929 again threatened the stability of the Weimar Republic. Determined to achieve political power in order to effect his revolution, Hitler built up Nazi support among German conservatives, including army, business, and industrial leaders. The Third Reich. In 1932, Hitler ran against the war hero Paul von Hindenburg for president and received 36.8% of the vote. With the government in chaos, 3 successive chancellors failed to maintain control, and in late January 1933 Hindenburg named the 43-year-old Hitler as chancellor, capping the stunning rise of an unlikely leader. January 30, 1933 marked the birth of the Third Reich, or as the Nazis called it, the 1,000-year Reich, after Hitler's boast that it would endure for a millennium. Reichstag fire. Though the Nazis never attained more than 37% of the vote at the height of their popularity in 1932, Hitler was able to grab absolute power in Germany largely due to divisions and inaction among the majority who opposed Nazism. After a devastating fire at Germany's parliament building, the Reichstag, in February 1933, possibly the work of a Dutch communist, though later evidence suggested Nazis set the Reichstag fire themselves, Hitler had an excuse to step up the political oppression and violence against his opponents.